Hello and welcome to the Magical Learning Podcast. As you can see, we've got an author guest today. Super excited to welcome Anthony Moss. And Anthony, we love to start with the question, how's your week been?
I'm having a great week actually. We're recording this podcast on a Friday of the long weekend, so how good is that? And my wife and I live in Sydney, but we have a little place in Port Macquarie, so we came a couple of days early to kind of enjoy the long weekend. I'm still working, but working in a different environment is so refreshing. So refreshing. Have a different
Well,
mindset, which is great.
yeah,
So great week.
I've been at my parents' because my dad had some heart issues, and I'm going home to my farm with them this weekend. Super excited. So can't wait for the
Cool.
long weekend. Poor old
Awesome.
Jez, who's our executive producer and also host of this, he had it last week and he had to work on the Friday. So sorry, Jez.
Right. Oh well. Somebody has to.
Exactly. Out. So, Anthony, you have written this awesome book, and it's not a big
Right.
book, but it's a really
No.
powerful book. And it's called The CEO Game Changer. And we're going to
Yeah.
talk about this in a second. But
Yes.
for you to share with our listeners and viewers, tell us a little bit about your journey so far.
Yeah. Well, look. I'm a Pommy Aussie. I'm a Possie. Originally from the UK, and was fortunate to work in the UK and Europe, and then got the opportunity to be shipped over to America to run a business in America, which I did for 10 years. Took my Australian wife and got married in America with my Australian wife and had two beautiful kids who happen to now have triple nationality because of that kind of opportunity. And then moved to Australia. So I guess while I was in America, I did that classic start a business, build a business. And it was a 10-year journey, which was a fabulous, fabulous journey. I mean, I was literally alone there. I was kind of like, I came up with a plan, which surprisingly enough was a 45-degree plan that showed revenue going up 45 degrees, profit going up 45 degrees, and costs going the other way, of course. That was the plan before I started. Took me a couple of years to kind of realize, maybe that might not be going quite to plan. So I had to come up with some other strategies we can kind of talk about. But then after 10 years, my wife and I decided to move to Australia. And I did a couple of CEO jobs in Australia before then deciding it was time to make money for me rather than necessarily for others. And became a consultant, where I realized I got to figure out, I got to kind of win work, deliver work, and all those sorts of things, really running my own small business. And so I've been doing that. Firstly, I did it with a group of four other partners, which was fantastic. And then 2012, I set up Leisure Industry, and that's my consulting brand, if you like. And the focus of Leisure Industry is really strategy development for high growth private companies, and also then helping them kind of set up advisory boards. And I can go more into that, but you tell me where to go next.
No,
Danette.
I reckon that's a great intro because it
Yeah,
leads then into tell us why you wrote, let me put it up,
thank
the
you.
CEO
That's
Game
great.
Changer.
Yeah,
And why it's important, because I
yeah,
reckon we've got some viewers out there that would be really interested in what you've written about in
yeah,
this particular book.
yeah. So, I share that CEO experience I had, particularly that time in America where I was from the UK and my corporate headquarters was in the UK, but I was in America, and my job, of course, was to build this business. So I was definitely kind of lonely. I had support from the UK, but I was kind of lonely. And even though it wasn't my business, it felt like my business. I'd come up with the plan, I'd come up with the projections. I'd said we only need this much cash, and then I had to keep phoning up saying, I think I need a bit more cash. And then I did a couple of other CEO roles, and then in my consulting practice, which I realized I've consulted with over 180 different companies, either one-on-one or in group workshop shop sessions, and I've seen businesses succeed and I've seen businesses fail. And I work in what I call the private company space, which is a lot of owner founder businesses, small business, typically in the kind of 20 to 200 staff range, and they are typically businesses in transition. They're going from one place to somewhere else, and they also typically, because of that size, they're what I call they don't have enough scale and size to have a fully qualified leadership team. And what I mean by that is, the CEO maybe have deep and broad commercial experience, but the leaders tend to be more kind of operational with deep domain expertise, but not necessarily deep and broad commercial experience. And so I've seen businesses succeed and I've seen businesses fail. And on the positive side, I think those private companies are fantastic contributors to society, because they are wealth generators, not just for the owners and the shareholders, but for all of the staff and the people and the suppliers and customers. So there's a tremendous benefit with those organizations. And so I guess my thinking is, what could I do through my consulting practice to, one, make them more resilient, and two, help them grow? And in that kind of assessment of what do CEOs need, I kind of went back to that time as I was in America, and I was what I call commercially lonely. And what I mean by that is, you're the kind of the fountain of inspiration and motivation for your staff, because people are kind of looking to you to share that vision, that North Star of kind of where you're going. And whether that's you've got, co-shareholders or even a board that you're reporting to, they may be all terribly supportive of you, but equally they kind of want to know that you've got the answers. And CEOs are only human. They normally tend to have pretty robust egos, so they're reasonably bulletproof, but they are human. And what that means is, when they're tired, stressed, out of sorts, or when decisions are really complex, it's a tough gig to be in. And so, I've seen the benefit of an advisory board, and advisory boards, having now created and chaired many of them, but really realizing that there actually aren't that many CEOs of private companies that are really aware of the whole concept of an advisory board. And even if they are, they're really not quite sure what it is. It sounds complicated. And so I wrote this book as a pathway to show them, one, the value proposition, how can this can help you in that commercial loneliness and help your business, but also to be a how-to. So part of it is the kind of inspiration piece, and the second half of the book is kind of the how-to that kind of says you can do it, and you can do it on your own.
And I loved your book because one, easy to read, it's short, sharp, very practical, as you said. And I love
it's not an academic tone.
No, not
No,
at
it's
all.
not.
Totally agree. And I love the questions and that you ask, the models you put in and everything.
Yeah.
Let's start, because some of our listeners might be going, an advisory board, is this a board? Is it our board? What is it? So I'd love for you just to define what is an advisory board and how it is different from a normal board that we would see with companies.
From kind of other things. Yes, certainly. So if you think of a board of directors, and many private companies, have a board, but by default, whether they've got multiple shareholders, family businesses, etc. And a board, let me describe it as a governance board, is governed itself under the corporations law. So the corporations law in Australia says if you've got a board of directors have certain responsibilities, and their responsibilities are to the organization as a whole, not just to the CEO, but to the organization as a whole. They're under legal obligations. They are directly responsible for things like work health and safety. They're directly liable for debts if the business goes insolvent. So they really are wedded to that that kind of organization. And they're entirely legitimate structure to have. All ASX listed companies have them, and certainly when there's non-executive directors involved, they're a great tool. A lot of, but equally, because their responsibility is to look after the business as a whole, sometimes that means that they've got to change the CEO. And that's a big factor. So a lot of private company CEOs kind of go, I like running my business. I really, I like being in charge. But if they're smart enough also to realize, well, actually, I don't know everything. And what would it be like if I had my kind of a team of advisors around me? And so an advisory board is a structured support system. It's different from coaching. It's different from consulting because it's got this structure around it, which is a frequency of meetings, people with the right skill sets to address the I guess gap in the strategy that you've got that's taking you from place A to place B, and means that you can fractionally access this extra resource and capability, learn from others that already walk the path that you want to walk, but with the key differentiator, you as the CEO are still in control. And what that means is you can, even though you have a very good advisory team, you can have a great advisory board who might give you some specific advice, which they collectively might say, we really think you should be considering X. The CEO can say, well, thank you very much, but I'm not going to do X, I'm doing Y. and what that means is that the CEO retains control. So they kind of get that benefit of structure and independence and objectivity, but without that control factor. So they do still stay in control, and that's why it's it's quite a significant difference. And equally, I suppose there's two other points really. One, it's not bound by those legal requirements. That has to be clearly defined, of course, to ensure that it's not. And the other difference is it is solely a commercial focus. Well, in my recommendation, it's solely a commercial focus that says, what's the CEO trying to achieve? What are the organizational challenges that they've got? How do we advise this CEO on taking those kind of next steps to growth? So it's a real zero-in commercial focus. I mean, it introduces things like governance, but it doesn't have a responsibility to ensure the OHS requirements are followed, etc. It doesn't have those other liabilities that go along with being a board of directors.
Nice. I love that answer. And it sort of leads into the next one. So, how can the advisory board then help businesses to unleash their potential? Because from my reading of this, this is actually a bit of a game changer. So, I'd love for you to share how it helps businesses unleash their potential.
Yeah, well, so as I said, it has a commercial focus, right? So CEO has a plan, has a direction. They kind of got a sense of where they're going. The advisory board firstly tests that strategy, that strategic direction, and uses their expertise and their experience to critique and or suggest kind of alternatives. And the whole perspective of an advisory board is that it enables the organization to kind of leapfrog, because there's a limiting factor for a CEO running their business, and that is the capability of their leadership team. So no business can outperform the capability of its leadership, right? And so an advisory board has, with the right advisors chosen because of the strategy that they want to go, can provide that step change, that leapfrog in knowledge and capability, where the leaders in the organization can go, oh, well, normally I've got to learn how to do X. And the advisory board can say, well, here's how you do X. Here's step 1, 2, and 3. Go do that. And so it creates that leapfrog effect. It also ensures that the CEO is focused on the strategy. When you're a CEO of a private company, there's lots of stuff to do. We all know that routine, right? We have the shower on a Monday morning and we've got crystal clarity about what we're trying to achieve in that day. You walk into the office, the first phone call that you take is that major customer that is now saying they're threatening to leave or whatever, and all of a sudden your whole week and day has changed. And that's just the day-to-day noise of running a business. But an advisory board structure is that periodic opportunity to ensure that the CEO is kind of really focused and on message and the best that they can be. Because I also, in addition to talking about commercial loneliness, I talk about the CEO multiplier effect. And the CEO multiplier effect is, because you are the fountain of inspiration for your kind of organization, as a CEO, what you do and what you do not do is seen by everybody in the organization. And and very definitely what you do not do. So you might say, we need to do this, we need to do this, but if you're not doing any of that stuff, nobody believes you. So you kind of got to be careful. But the CEO multiplier effect is when the CEO's on their game, or they have to be on their game most of the time. But as I said, we are only human, so sometimes the CEOs are not on their game, and the advisory board is that safe place where the CEO can be vulnerable, um, uh, declare that they actually don't know how to approach a challenge, or they don't know how to make that decision, because every opportunity seems to be equal and valid, which is the shades of grey of running a business, right? And so the advisory board is that space that helps to keep the CEO focused, kind of on message, and ensure that multiplier effect is as good as it can be. There's many other reasons too. I talk about the black book. The right advisory board brings the black book, and what I mean by that is other advisors. When an organization always has to have partners, whether that's marketing partners, accountants, lawyers, other training organizations, etc. Because advisory board members have kind of been there, they've got all of their own little black books that can shorten that time frame that a CEO has to say, hey, I need somebody to help with X. How do I find somebody? The advisory board, more often than not, has got those trusted networks in place. So, yeah.
Love that. And so let's flip it to what then can be some of the challenges with advisory boards?
Yeah, that's there are challenges. No structure or thing is a perfect panacea, right? So firstly, an organization does need to have a product and a strategy, a product that customers want and are willing to pay for. So they kind of got those kind of essentials sort of have to be there. But equally, then you have to assemble the right advisors. So you kind of have to have the right chair that's got that kind of independence, objectivity, who realizes their job is to make the meeting effective. Because in my advisory boards, the CEO doesn't chair the advisory board. The chair chairs the advisory board. So kind of they've got to be the right sort of personalities. And of course, the advisors have to have the right skill sets, domain expertise that the organization needs at a time, but they also need to be culturally aligned to where the CEO is and where their resources is. So if you're a smaller business, I don't know, a $10 million business, and you've got an advisor sitting on that board that's a CEO of being a CEO of $1 billion business, and that communication may be misaligned if that advisor can't make the leap and have an empathetic response that understands that the CEO's resources currently and capability is at this level. So it doesn't make sense to kind of be presenting something that's 10x that. So there has to be cultural kind of alignment. So there's the challenge with the advisors, but then there's equally the challenge with the CEO. CEOs, if they're going to choose an advisory board, that means hopefully they've got the right kind of mindset, but they also have to have the mindset of saying, well, I'm investing time into this thing. I need to get the most out of it. And how do I get the most out of it? I get the most out of it by preparing beforehand, fully engaging in a meeting, and then afterwards deciding on a course of action. and taking some course of action. Um, if CEOs constantly never take the advice that comes out of an advisory board over a fair period of time, then either the advisory board is wrong or the CEO is wrong. And equally, if the CEO never takes any action, doesn't kind of go forward, that can be pretty frustrating. So I have seen them how they don't work. Having set up a number of them and run a number of them, I can see where things work and where things don't work. So there has to be that investment of time and commitment and of money too. So yeah.
Good, yeah, because you need to pay for that awesome advice that you're going to get. And I've got a question here, which I didn't send through to you, but I know you've talked about in your book. Can too many cooks spoil the broth? So is there a number where you go, probably we shouldn't go above that for advisory boards?
Yes, I would say so, and I think that thing is a maximum of 3 advisors. Um, and the reason I say that is the context. The context of the advisory board coming in is to an organization that doesn't have the resources necessary to get where it needs to go. So it's trying to tap into a level of expertise that it doesn't have internally, and it therefore has to then take that advice, put some actions into place, and see that advice kind of work. If you end up with too many advisors around the table, you end up with too many voices, and that message can get diluted and lead to inaction. Whereas I think if you've got that right, and I think it's between 2 and 3 is the ideal size for an ISA bird, and that's based on my experience of just being having run them.
Nice, nice. So, you know, there's a lot of people who either run businesses or are interested in starting up their own businesses. And I reckon there's some advice that you probably wish you had when you started out. So I'd love if you could share, whether it's one or a couple of bits of advice that you wish someone had shared with you much earlier on.
Yeah, well, when I was shipped over to the US to start that business, that kind of greenfield site business, I was very committed. I was very, I was young. I was very energetic, and had a real clear vision of kind of what I wanted to achieve. But I was in a new country, different culture, similar but different. Um, and had great support from my board back in the UK, but they were 3,000 miles away. And I had this sense that I had to figure it out, and I had to do it, and that was silly. So my advice to my 27-year-old self back then would have been, okay, go into the market, test the value proposition of the market with customers, and then go and find the right people who've done this before and have a chat with them. So doesn't mean you have to set up an advisory board, but you have to have your team of advisors around you to give you a sense of objectivity, because we're not objective when we're kind of focused in driving that business, and our whole status is wrapped up in the business, and our financial wealth is wrapped up in the business as well. There's no way you can be objective about it. So you just need, whether it's a coach, whether it's a mentor, whether it's a consultant, and then maybe at some stage an advisory board, but have the wherewithal to go, I know what I know. I need somebody to show me and talk to me about the stuff I don't know. So, but I have to say, my own journey, and I think this is common, was I felt I had to prove my capability by making most of the decisions for the first several years. Then it's only yeah, it's only when you kind of go, hang on a second, I'm working 7 days a week, 24/7. I either have to change how I lead or I'm going to die. And so yeah, as early as you can, get that external advice. Because any advice is useful because it helps you calibrate your own thinking. So that would be
Yeah,
my
nice.
advice. Go on the
Yeah,
advice journey
I
and
love
and
it.
ratchet it up as your business becomes more complex and that kind of stuff. So
Oh, great advice. So my next question is, because we get a number of authors on our podcast, and so we
Yeah.
love to understand their actual writing process, because everyone seems to be different, and we know
Yeah.
we've got some listeners and viewers who want to write. So would you
Yes.
mind sharing your process?
Well, look, the first thing you have to do is to go, well, why are you writing this thing? You know, you have to identify, what's the end game? And the end game for me was, you know, um, not that many private company CEOs are aware and familiar with advisory boards. And I have seen firsthand the transformational impact of that, how it can make businesses more resilient, how it can make them grow, and how it can stop them failing. And so I was passionate about how do we get that message out. And I kind of researched the market, and there's not really that much material on advisory boards, but that was the first step. So I kind of did the research. Let's scan what's out there. Let's kind of identify any research papers, other books, etc., which I kind of had a look at. And then you have to kind of map out in the sort of sense, well, what do I want the book to say? What do I want somebody to do when they pick up the book, and what are they gonna do with it? So I determined that I wanted to keep it short and sharp, and to have those two aspects to it. One, which is, here's the value proposition, and here's the simple step by step, just so that you can really go on that journey yourself if you wish to. Um, uh, then putting it down to paper. Now, I can't say that putting it down on paper was the easiest thing I've ever done. Not least because, I'm running my consulting practice. That's my day job. And this was my kind of passion project that I did in kind of evenings and weekends. And I have to say, for the first quite considerable time, I won't tell you how much, how long, I probably rewrote chapter one, probably about 10 times. And every time I would look at it, I'd go back and I'd read and I'd go, that's not what I want to say. No. Hang on a second. Let me read what. And then I finally realized, I think you should move on to chapter two. Let's do chapter two. And then, but when, I hadn't written a book before. I had written a white paper, but hadn't written a book. And, so I did find that initially, challenging. And, it's fantastic though, because it really does force you to unpack your ideas, because you kind of go, like I said, when you read it again, you go, that's not good enough. I can do better than that. And, I guess if you're a bit of a perfectionist, it takes even longer. But, yeah, it took me a while. It took me a lot longer than I had. I had a period of illness that I had to stop it for a little while, but then got back on the horse again and said, I'm finally going to commit to do this. But can I share two other things too? I finally engaged a company to help me edit the book and to publish the book. A company called Grammar Factory, which did a fantastic job. Not sure whether we should say that here or not, but they did a
Totally
great job.
okay.
They did a great job for me. But also then, because it had taken me a couple of years to get this thing out of there, when it finally was published, I was kind of over it. I was kind of like, yeah, that's it. It's done. It's finally done. Phew, let me kind of leave it. And then fortunately, my family said, well, you got to have a book launch. You got to have a book launch. I'm like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. Anyway, I finally did have a book launch, and I got a great reception, great response to the book, which is awesome. It just got me over that hump of, wow, I'm done with that thing. Let's put it away now. To no, I did it for a reason, and that's why I'm happy to be part of this your podcast, Danette, because that's my message, to get that message out there.
Awesome. And we're so grateful you're here too, Anthony.
Thank you.
And I so get that last bit when it's published, and you're like, oh, it's done. Thank
Yeah,
goodness.
yeah,
Yeah, totally get it. So we're just about at the end, but I'm really
yeah.
curious. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners and our viewers um, around advisory boards and your book, as well as can you please share where people can find you? Because I'm pretty sure they'd love to find you and chat to you too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, I probably kind of go back to that comment I made earlier about, how would you communicate to your younger self? So my message is, if you are a CEO that's running your company, and you've got that sense, that term that I used, commercially lonely, if that resonates with you, then my recommendation number one is to get some advice. Like I said, coaches, consultants, mentors, they are fantastic. When your business is at a reasonable scale, and it doesn't have to be huge, but when you are motivated to take that next step change, that's the time to think about an advisory board. And I think that would be a time to get the book, have a look at the book. It gives you that step-by-step approach. One way I shared with somebody to think about this concept is, if I want to think about an advisory board, who would they do? What would they do? And I said, well, sit down and think about your industry, your business, and where you want to go, and picture in your mind the person in your industry that you have the most respect for, which could be anybody, but we all know them, right? We all know, we say, geez, I'd love to be like Mike, that kind of phrase. And go, well, okay, well, maybe we might be able to engage with Mike. If they were sitting around your advisory board, how great would that be? But then you can kind of go, well, if it wasn't Mike, what if it was somebody like Mike that just maybe a notch down than Mike? And then people kind of go, well, that would be fantastic if I had somebody like that. And that's the catalyst to go, maybe I should explore this thing. And then you have to find the chair and all that kind of stuff. In terms of where you can find that book, my book, you can find my book just go to my website, leadyourindustry.com. I'll just say that again, leadyourindustry.com. It's also on Amazon and a few of the other places too. It's called The CEO Game Changer. Thank you for holding that up, Danette. That's fantastic. I'm also on LinkedIn. Reach out to me on LinkedIn as well, and you'll see some posts around the book there too. So thank you.
That's awesome. And, I think back to my journey as a business owner, and, we've been running businesses for 27 years. What a game changer. And particularly for CEOs, I love that, that differentiator from a normal board or governance board, as we would call them, to the advisory board, which is really about boosting that CEO, where you may not, as you said, be able to afford those people full time, but you access that expertise through your advisory board. And yes, you do need to pay, because we're paying for expertise. But what a game changer. So, Anthony, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you for inviting me, Danette. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
And to all of our listeners and viewers, thank you so much for sharing, and have a magical week.